Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel, and I hope everybody has had a great week. Going to start off the show today with a little bit of entertainment talk, and then we'll get into the political news of the day. But first, I want to tell you that you can find my books on Amazon.com. You can just do a search for Edward Dentzel there. All of my books, my 3 Govicide books, and my book Distant will line up for you very nicely. You can download them to your Kindle in a matter of moments. You can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. I know I have a lot more followers now. Very happy about that. You can go to my website, edwarddentzel.com, where you can find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. You can also find my highlight reel there, a video about 2.5 minutes long that I put together. You can also find my shows at Podbean, SoundCloud, and on YouTube. And you can find me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. As you all know, today is the official opening for the next Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens. And don't worry, I'm not going to give you any spoilers. I've not seen the movie, but I have read the plot. And that's where I want to kind of go with this. Being that I know a little bit about putting plots together, that's why I mentioned my books at the beginning of every show. I am used to coming up with original stories, original characters, original plots, themes, all what needs to be done, the same kind of things that need to be done when you want to put a movie together. And I got to tell you, having read this plot, you talk about uninspired. Once again, haven't seen the movie. And I will go see it eventually. I'm not going to go and fight for a seat. It's weird to me to go to a theater and every seat is taken. There's just something weird. Maybe it's because most of us are not used to that. Usually when we go to see the movie's what? A third full. The theater's a third full, half full. But to go in there and actually have to try to find a seat, it's like going to a football game for a popular team where you know all the seats are going to be taken. We're just not used to that when we go to the movies. So I'm going to wait till the crowd thins a little bit before I go to see it. But looking at the plot, I read it, and it's like I know this plot. I've seen this plot before. And it leaves me in the impression that it took about an hour to write this screenplay. That's, to me, looks, maybe I'm exaggerating there, but let's just say less than an 8-hour workday to come up with this idea. And it's a big, I guess it would be a big letdown, isn't it? Granted, you can go out there. I'm not going to tell you the specifics on it. You can go find it. I think you know where to find it. I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to give that much away. But after all these years, after we know what the last 3 Star Wars movies, and I was the perfect age when Star Wars came out. 1977, 1980, 81, and 1983. I was 7 years old, 10, 11 years old, and 13 years old. Doesn't get much better than that. Maybe had I just been a few years older when the first Star Wars movie came out, maybe if I had been born in maybe 1965, 66. But being born in 1970 was still pretty good in regards to then seeing the Star Wars movies a decade later. But the last 3 were huge letdowns. I mean, there's still jokes being told about those 3 movies. Attack of the Clones and the rest of them. And I'm not saying it doesn't look like this movie is going to be that bad, but it certainly does. The story seems to be uninspired. And you have all these years. You have J.J. Abrams as running it. Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote The Empire Strikes Back, which is considered to be the best of all of the Star Wars movies. And this is the best they can do with a story. I don't know. It reminds me of that game, you know what Mad Libs are? Where there are already parts of sentences and all it asks you to do is put a noun here, put a verb here, put a color here, put a number here. This is what that plot feels like to me. So, and there's something else that happens in the movie that I can't believe they put in there that's going to let a lot of people down. And once again, it's just a little bit of a letdown. Like I said, I'm going to go see it anyway. I don't know. See, I'm not a big visual effects guy anyway. I don't write that way. I have action sequences in my books if it goes along with the story. But to me, stories are about characters, and they are how the characters react with the plot, and it's not so much about the action. And this seems to be an old plot with newer characters, but the characters that we've kind of seen before. And I'd like to think that in my writing, I try to be a little bit more original than that. Especially when you are working in a universe like the Star Wars universe, where you can virtually do anything. Anything is possible when you have an underlying basic concept like that. And it seems like they took the easy way out. Once again, haven't seen the movie, have read the plot, a fairly detailed plot. And as I got toward the end of it, I will tell you, I just started shaking my head like this cannot be happening. So there's that. Let's move on to the politics. An article that caught my eye from CNBC and Jim Cramer. Not a big Jim Cramer fan. He's not a conservative. He's just kind of loud. He's gotten in some trouble here and there with the SEC. But he makes a very good point at CNBC.com. He's made a pretty good point within the last few days about oil prices. And as I've told you, the oil market has been a fascination for me this year. Seeing it go up, seeing it go down, learning a little bit about the different types of oil that come out of the ground and how one spot you can make money at $40 a barrel, and other spots the price needs to be $60 a barrel for it to make any money. And OPEC, and whether it's going to cut back on production, whether it's going to ramp up production to lower the price to keep its market share. Those OPEC countries that aren't happy with Saudi Arabia, it's all been fascinating to me this year. And I've told you the biggest problem that we've had in the United States is we've not seen a correlation of the decrease in prices outside of the oil market in relation to the oil market. Down here in Florida, depends on what your state taxes are, what the price of a gallon of gasoline is going to be. We're easily under $2 now. Right down the street here, it's $1.95. So, it's like 2/3 of what it was a year ago, or not long ago. But still, it seems like all these other prices continue to go up. Doesn't seem like food's getting any cheaper. Are hotel rooms getting any cheaper? Is anything else? Because companies' transportation costs for trucks and cars and the oil-based products they may use to run these plants, heating oil, whatever the case may be, are a huge expense. And you would think that as that expense gets cheaper, and all of these businesses are competitive, that you would see it's not necessarily deflation that's happening. It's just a lowering of a particular expense that goes into a product, and you would think that these companies would be able to lower their prices. Instead, they're staying the same. At least they're staying the same, if not going up. And I've been pointing this out for quite a few months now because as a bachelor, I do my own shopping. But Jim Cramer brings up something else that, unless you study the market and the whole economy and looking at actual different sectors, you might not realize, is that all of these people, millions and millions and millions of Americans who all have cars, they're spending less money on gas these days, but that money is not going somewhere else. We are not seeing a correlation that now that money is being spent more at Best Buy or at Applebee's or at Walmart or here or there. It seems that most people are taking that money that they are saving because of gas being cheaper and putting in their pocket or paying down their debt, putting it in the bank for a rainy day. And that goes along with business as well. Businesses who are saving money on oil are not expanding here, expanding there, taking a risk here, taking a risk there. I would define that as there is still a lot of fear in this economy, despite the fact that unemployment, if you want to believe it, is 5%. Despite us being told that all these people working, there's still a lot of fear out there. Now, good on Jim Cramer that he gives some different reasons he thinks this is happening. One of the reasons is Obamacare. He says that you're not seeing this increased expense somewhere else because what probably is happening is that money that we're saving on gas is being eaten up by an increase in healthcare costs, which is obviously happening. I've told you, my premium for my Humana plan has gone up 50% in, a year and a half? Something like that. Well, that's surely enough to eat up the amount of money I'm saving in gas. And I don't even drive a lot. So it's probably the gas prices going down has been a net loss for me, given that my healthcare costs have gone up. Very insightful from Mr. Kramer. It also could be that these companies that have to provide healthcare, don't have to, but they do, for their workers, their expenses on healthcare are going up. So they're not seeing that benefit from a decrease in oil prices either. It's kind of been a wash at best. And as I always like to remind you regarding oil, and this is something that we as conservatives forget, and this is an excellent point to make anytime you get in an argument with liberals about oil and we should get away from the green energy. What do you think plastic is? We forget all of the stuff that is made from oil. And I don't mean the liquid oil that's going into some machine that causes a product to be made. The actual thing is made out of oil. Your car does not just run on gasoline that comes from oil. Those plastic fenders, they come from oil too. All those Priuses driving around with all that plastic on it, what do you think that is? It's oil. The plastic wheel covers, oil. Plastic seat belt covers inside the car, oil. And when you start thinking about that and you start looking at your house and things you might want to buy for your house, or if you have a business, something you might want to buy for your business, it's made of plastic. It should be cheaper. It's not. It's very interesting what's going on out there. And so I've been telling you since I started on Red State Talk Radio that there is a decent amount of inflation going on out there, and it's being covered up by the fact that oil has been going in the opposite direction. And the reason that oil has been going on in the opposite direction is because of a glut of oil. We have people who won't stop pumping oil, and hey, it's their oil. They can do what they want. If OPEC wants to keep pumping, they're the ones doing the work. I don't know what you can necessarily do about that. But there's also, I think, a decrease in demand as well because of inflation. Just because of good old-fashioned money being pumped into the economy. and prices changing not due to supply and demand necessarily. If it's being changed, it's because of demand, because there's money in the economy that's just being dumped in. There is no corresponding work or service countering it. It's no different than a bunch of people in a room with no money, and then you just kind of drop a bunch of money into the room from a hole in the ceiling. That's what inflation is, increasing the money supply. Whereas none of these people had to do anything to get it. And so they can artificially bid up goods and services without goods and services being produced to get that money in the first place. Very interesting article about oil and prices and this money not being spent elsewhere. It doesn't surprise me. I think there's a lot of fear out there. I've told you, a lot of businesses are not expanding just because we have an administration who doesn't like business. In fact, I've gone as far to say, not recently, but I've said we're so worried about the Middle East and immigration, and we hope to get somebody into that office, the presidency and an administration, that knows what to do in these situations regarding terrorism, immigration, and the rest of it. The number one point I'd like to make about electing a good conservative person as president is that the attitude of business people, and I don't mean CEOs and board of directors of huge corporations, but those companies that truly employ people in the United States, those companies that have 50 employees and less, those people's attitudes will change. Because they will not be as fearful that the federal government will come down on them. That's exactly kind of also what happened in the 1980s. Although probably to a lesser extent. Also, we had inflation, we had stagflation, the misery index with Jimmy Carter, and even into Ronald Reagan's first couple years, things weren't going. I mean, there was a point in Reagan's first term where it was like, we don't think that Ronald Reagan can get elected. A lot of people forget that. But then once business saw what was going on, saw that money could be made and investments could be made, and it had a government that wasn't going to spend its way into oblivion. Yes, we ran some deficits, but for different reasons. And an administration that was friendly to business. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be an altering of the tax structure or anything to get business people to change their minds. As long as they know they're not going to be penalized for being a little risky, just building another building, working on another patent, hiring a couple more people, that can mean everything in the world. Just that attitude. The problem is, though, this administration has hung some really bad principles on business, mainly Obamacare, that isn't going to go away as soon as the next Republican becomes president. It's going to take some work. But sometimes our economy is so much about attitude. And what you're seeing is what Jim Cramer's talking about is the attitude out there sucks. It just does. So, interesting article. I will link to it at edwarddentzel.com. Let's move on to something else. There was an article that I mentioned yesterday I didn't get to. It has to do with Ronald Reagan, coincidentally. And whether Ronald Reagan, this comes from the New York Times, whether Ronald Reagan would recognize today's GOP in what happened at the debate on Tuesday night. and how it was all about keeping people out of the United States, immigration. We don't know who the terrorists are. We have to go after them here. We have to go in there. No, Rand Paul says we need to take a more of an isolationist policy. And Elizabeth Williamson at the New York Times said Ronald Reagan would not recognize today's GOP. I could not disagree with her more. I just could not regarding this. Now, she used as her example his closing statement before he left office in 1988, which I think, just to start, is a poor place to start comparing who Ronald Reagan was during his 8 years and what is going on in 2015, mainly because farewell speeches, do they have a lot of substance to them? Especially when it comes to Ronald Reagan, who at least publicly, hardly ever said a bad word about anybody except the Soviet Union. He made fun of Democrats, made jokes about them and things, but no nasty words. So, at least in public, once again. So, farewell address maybe for any president, any politician who's leaving office is a poor place to start a policy discussion. I'd compare it to what I said about Marco Rubio's statement yesterday. His closing statement on Tuesday night that seemed more like a speech that somebody running for high school class president. The difference is he's actually trying to run for president. Well, Ronald Reagan, he had already put in his 2 terms at that point, so he got to say whatever he wanted to say. So Elizabeth Williams starting there is odd to me. You have to also remember something about Ronald Reagan, that it's, I don't know if you guys experienced this, but I have experienced this with liberals within the last 10 years. People who I know are liberals. Not crazy, kooky, way to the left, Michael Moore types, but definitely liberals. And they might have voted Democrat their whole lives. They might have even been old enough to vote for Ronald Reagan in 1980, 1984. I was not old enough to ever vote for him. I didn't turn 18 until 1988. My first vote was for Bush 41 against Michael Dukakis. But for those people who were liberals who were old enough to vote for Ronald Reagan, it's funny how over the years I've run into a few of them, and maybe they mentioned something passing, because as you know, I don't bring up politics around people who I'm not sure what their political affiliation is. I just let people talk. And even if they bring up something mean about Ted Cruz or George W. Bush, generally I keep my mouth shut. It's just not, I'm telling you people, it's just not worth it. But among some of those people, it's funny how they will say something like, will say once in a while something nice about Ronald Reagan, even though I know, I'd have to know, that back then in the 1980s, they hated him. Hated him. But I think somewhere between 1988 and the 2000s, they started looking at the Republican Party and thought that the Republican Party is different now than it was then. It's kind of a revisionist history type of thing going on with them. Somehow they forget their attitude toward Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. Suddenly now, he was this kindly old gentleman who cracked jokes. Yeah, he hated the Soviet Union, but he never fired any missiles at them, and it's funny how that works. It's really, really weird to me. Because I would say that the Ronald Reagan that we saw in public, and you can go on YouTube and all these humorous clips of him saying things, making fun of the Soviets, making fun of Democrats. The truth is, underneath that was a hardcore conservative. See, when I think about Ronald Reagan, I'm not so sure that he changed between his 1964 speech, the Time for Choosing speech, which to me is still in the top 5 speeches ever given in the history of the United States, and he wasn't even a politician at the time. Easily in the top 5. Once in a while, I just like to go and listen to that speech. That's, to me, who Ronald Reagan was at the time, and that's who he continued to be. But I think he understood, I don't need to give a speech like that. All I have to do is remember that's who I am underneath. But people don't need to see that. All they need to know is that I'm conservative, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But that hardcore part of me, we're going to tuck it down here in this back pocket and only bring it out when I need it. But that's who I am. That's who I am. Now, see, the difference also is that with Ronald Reagan back then, conservatism still kind of new. In fact, in American politics, conservatism as it is defined is still relatively new. It's certainly not as old as liberalism in the United States. I don't know. Could you call Abraham Lincoln a conservative? I don't know. We think about Calvin Coolidge. Would he have considered himself a classical liberal? But as a political force, a consistent political force, it's only been really like the last 35 years that it's been a political force. So Ronald Reagan was also acting in a different time regarding conservatism, when it was still kind of new. But the idea that I get is that he would perfectly go along with what you saw on that stage on Tuesday night. He would recognize what all of those men and that woman were saying, agreeing with some, disagreeing with others. But you have to remember something. The reason that all of them, whether you like some of them, even Donald Trump, the reason they can act like that and say those things, and a lot of it being right, is because conservatism is a force of nature now. Now. Whereas, even with Ronald Reagan, when he ran for governor of California, he didn't give any speech like the Time for Choosing speech. He didn't give any speech like that. When he ran for president in 1980, he had some hard speeches, nothing like the Time for Choosing speech. You know, it's down, I guess you could say, down and dirty as it gets with that speech. And it's pretty hardcore. And that's what I love so much about it. But that speech goes right in line with what most of the topics were on Tuesday night. But once again, there's some sort of revisionist history that goes along. And I think that Elizabeth Williamson in the New York Times is supposed to be like the token Republican there. I read that somewhere. Is that true? But I've heard over the last few years, especially since moving to Florida, pops up once in a while around me, well, Ronald Reagan couldn't get elected in today's GOP, saying, well, the GOP has gone so far to the right, has gone so far off the map that even the person that they respect, Ronald Reagan, couldn't get elected. When somebody says that, and you hear him say that, that just shows you that person has no idea what they're talking about. They don't know who Ronald Reagan was. They don't understand how hardcore underneath he really was. Do they not understand the Time for Choosing speech, which was a speech that he gave not trying to win any voters because he wasn't running, just was able to speak from the heart? And in fact, probably one of the biggest tragedies of Republican politics is that in a time when conservatism is a more recognized ideology in the United States, you don't get anybody giving a speech like the Time for Choosing speech. Granted, there are a lot of good speeches out there about how crazy our federal government is, but there's a reason that speech continues to resonate over all the others. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
You're listening to Red State Talk Radio, America's premier conservative talk radio network.
You critics don't define our honor. You try to shame us for doing our job. You teach children to fear us, crowds to attack us, and good people to doubt us. But we will never back down from our sworn duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. We wake up every day, put on our badge, strap a gun to our hips, kiss our families goodbye, and put our lives between the law-abiding and any criminal who threatens their rights. We serve people of every color and creed, men, women, and children in violent, dangerous neighborhoods, because they have the same right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as CEOs, movie stars, and the political elite. We are Americans, and we are the American police officer. We stand with the National Rifle Association of America, and the NRA stands with us. Together, we're freedom's safest place.
I know. We Christians are just as bad as Muslims who fly planes into buildings and video themselves sawing people's heads off and beheading kids and mutilating women and shooting people who draw cartoons. That's right. You better be just as wary of us Christians, because we don't mess around. Don't be insulting our Jesus, because you think Muslims are bad. Oh, man, don't push us. You think the Muslims are bad when they prey on people for insulting Muhammad? You're really going to get it when Christians pray for you for insulting Jesus.
It could be easy to take what we have for granted and not appreciate everything the men and women of law enforcement do for us every day. So to all my heroes out there, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for protecting my family,
my business,
my kids,
our community.
Thank you for listening to us,
for being there for me, for keeping me safe.
To all those in law enforcement, thank you.
This is Primo Mondoni, host of the Red State Town Hall. Join me Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern on Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. So, lock it in and rip the knob off.
This is Paul Preston, host of Agenda 21 Radio. Join me Monday through Friday on Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. So lock it in and rip the knob off.
We're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I want to continue to talk about Ronald Reagan and his relationship with the current Republican Party in 2015 and how we go into 2016. And the insistence by Elizabeth Williamson from the New York Times that Ronald Reagan would not recognize today's GOP. Oh, yes, he would. He definitely would. If he didn't know, if Ronald Reagan just beamed down from heaven, didn't know what was going on at the earth at all, and was standing in a corner of that auditorium in Las Vegas, where were they? They were at the Venetian, the Palazzo, the Venetian. And nobody else knew he was there. He was just watching it. He would know what's going on. He would know exactly what every one of those people, all 9 of them, were saying. He'd know, you know what it'd say? Oh, yeah, liberals still messing up the world. He'd know that the reason they were talking this way is because liberalism had completely continued to trash our country after Ronald Reagan passed away. He'd know. He'd understand perfectly well regarding terrorism and the threat to the United States. And I'm sure that he would have a lot in common with many of the people up on that stage. It might be mix and match of what he would do regarding all of this, but he'd understand. And he'd recognize their plight in trying to fix something that liberals have screwed up for the last 7 years. Because Ronald Reagan knew a little bit about that. The advantage that he had, he didn't have to fix 7 years. He just had to fix 4 years of Jimmy Carter. The problem is, if any one of those 9 people win next November, they're going to have to fix 8 years of Barack Obama. He'd know. There's no way he would beam down and look at what they were saying as, I just don't understand what's going on. I am totally flummoxed. How could these people be saying that? Don't they know? Do you really believe that would be his attitude? He would know, because Ronald Reagan understood all this. He understood evil. He understood socialism, communism. He understood that there was evil in the world and that you had to fight it. Even if you don't think you're going to win, there is still the point of fighting it, which is a point I was making to my mother a couple days ago. He would understand. And he would understand the exasperation that all of those people on stage showed on Tuesday night. He would understand the confusion that the average American had watching Cruz, Rubio, and Paul go at each other. I could just see Ronald Reagan standing in the back just shaking his head. That same Senate. Man, the Senate has not changed at all. Saying to himself, man, I'm glad I never ran for senator of California. Glad I was just the governor. He'd know. And he would be right along with them. There's another point to this, by the way. And the reason that liberals try to rewrite Reagan's history while he was president, one of the reasons is, who can they latch onto back then? Jimmy Carter? Walter Mondale? Tip O'Neill? Geraldine Ferraro? Michael Dukakis? Would you want to hitch your legacy as your average Democrat to any of them? Would you really? Do you ever hear any Democrat today who was old enough to vote for any of them say how good any one of them were? They never bring them up. They know they exist. Probably voted for them at the time, but they know better. So what do? They try to cover up that they were for those people by saying, oh, that Ronald Reagan, he was such a kindly old man. Because they know, even today, liberals know you can't mention Jimmy Carter with a straight face and say you like them. Or Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale, a generation from now, we're going to even forget he existed. Geraldine Ferraro, same way. Michael Dukakis, same way. 50 years from now, they will have been gone. We'll remember Jimmy Carter because he was president. The rest of those guys and that woman will fade into history. Gone. Except maybe for people from Minnesota who will remember Walter Mondale. But overall, and it won't be because education or history classes in public schools stinks. It's just these people were just undynamic. They didn't do anything. They weren't very good leaders. That's why liberals today want to say that Ronald Reagan is so different from today's GOP. And the problem we have now as Republicans and as conservatives is that we didn't beat Barack Obama in 2012, so now he has 8 years of a legacy. And that's harder to fix than 4 years of Jimmy Carter, first of all. And also what's been the problem is that we have not discredited this guy enough. Instead, we've been so caught up in trying to replace John Boehner for the last year. And I talked about that yesterday. we have not discredited Barack Obama enough. Unlike what happened in 1980 when Ronald Reagan beat Jimmy Carter, limiting him to one term and discrediting him. Kind of like what Bill Clinton did to Bush 41 in 1992. The problem is we will never have any chance now to beat Barack Obama. So he's going to leave the presidency undefeated. So it's going to be harder. There will be people, unfortunately, 30-some years from now who will look back at Barack Obama and speak favorably of him. Unlike Jimmy Carter, where you can't find anybody to speak favorably of him. I mean, somebody, well, who is it? Pat Caddell, who worked for Jimmy Carter. He's on the Republican side now. Even though he still considers him a Democrat, he looks at today's Democrats and thinks they're all crazy. But that's the problem we're going to have, is that the Barack Obama legacy is going to continue to live on. It's going to live on a lot longer than Jimmy Carter's did. And that's going to present a problem, especially since when you beat somebody like Jimmy Carter, like in 1980, you kind of shut him up. People had their choice at the election. You got defeated, Jimmy. Keep your mouth shut for a little while. That won't be the case with Barack Obama. No matter which one of those people on that stage wins in 2016, I hope one of them does. Barack Obama's going to be out there, and he's going to be going to all the NBA games and NCAA games. He's going to be here, going to be there. They're going to put a microphone in front of his face, and he's going to be able to say, oh, I was never defeated. And so what they're doing now, I don't know. I got elected twice. I don't know why they're trying to change everything that I did. Now do you see the problem with Mitt Romney? It's tough. But don't try to tell me, never let somebody pull that on you, that Ronald Reagan wouldn't. What do they think he is? Did they think he was a moderate Republican? He was pro-life, pro-gun, pro-military, somewhat interventionist. And they'll try to hang their hat on some immigration bill that he signed in 1986. And the only reason he signed that is because he knew the bill was going to get passed anyway. And he just couldn't see the efficiency of having all these people who are illegally leave and then get to come back. It's the only reason, that Mazzoli bill. It's the only reason. There's no way that Ronald Reagan would continue to do that over and over like it seems a lot of Republicans want to do today. I mean, if there's anything that Ronald Reagan probably wouldn't identify with, are those Republicans today who want to open the borders and believe in amnesty and Syrian refugees and on and on and on. The problem is Elizabeth Williamson looks at it the opposite direction. When she's saying that he wouldn't recognize the modern Republican Party, she's talking about the conservatives. He wouldn't recognize the true conservatives. It's the opposite. He wouldn't recognize those moderates on that particular topic, not necessarily the whole Republican umbrella. He wouldn't recognize those people that continue to fight for something that obviously is not good for the United States, endangers our economy, endangers our security. And is just illegal. How about that? So, what a joke of an article. But there will be people, now granted, it's in the New York Times. I don't know how many Republicans are going to read it anyway, but I just thought I should tell you about it. Always remember, Ronald Reagan was way more hardcore than he ever let on. Just remember that. Tip O'Neill, you've heard, Tip O'Neill called Ronald Reagan the toughest politician he ever had to deal with. And it's weird how that is so much different from what we think of Ronald Reagan, the guy going to all these little dinners, and you can see him all on YouTube if you want to watch him. Doesn't seem like that, but Ronald Reagan learned a lot when he was the leader of the Actors Union in Hollywood, the head of SAG. Most people forget he was that. He was a tough negotiator. Tough. And dare I say it, tougher than any of those people on that stage, including Donald Trump. Let's move on to something else. I have some criticism. Speaking of the GOP, I saw, and as I've told you, I don't listen to talk radio. I've been listening to some other shows on Red State Talk Radio, but as far as terrestrial radio, Rush, Sean Hannity, the rest of them, I just don't listen to them anymore. And I think more than anything, you've heard me dish out a lot of criticism toward them in the last so many months, like calling them the conservative establishment media. Conservative establishment media. Man, that's hard to say. Maybe I might have to come up with a different phrase for that. A lot of M's and a lot of syllables in that. In any case, what Rush is saying about, well, being given this omnibus bill with Paul Ryan at $1.1 trillion and all of this pork, then we might as well just disband the GOP. This is what drives me nuts. And I'm going to apologize beforehand because I know how many of you hold Rush in such high regard. Is it correct me if I'm wrong, but for the last 25 years, he's the one who has been telling us that we need to vote for the Republican no matter if he is or she is conservative or not. Simply because the alternative is worse. Now, I've already told you, this goes back to last year. I've told you, I'm not going to vote for Jeb Bush if he gets the nomination. I'm not going to vote for Mike Huckabee if he gets the nomination. I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump if he gets the nomination. And back when Mitt Romney, there was a rumor that he might run, I'm not going to vote for Mitt Romney if he wanted to run again. They've used up my goodwill. You give them breaks, you let them go here, you let them go there, but at some point, you have to start thinking, well, I've compromised my values here and there and elsewhere. When are they going to compromise their values for me? When are they going to get more conservative for me instead of me always having to get more liberal? I just want to know. I don't mind going to the middle a little now and then, dare I say it. What I mind is that it never comes back the other way from them. But here we are. We have the guy who's been leading conservatives for 25 years. Over those 25 years, all these callers, and I remember when I used to listen to them, these people calling, do I really have to go out and vote for John McCain? What did Rush say? Yes. And now, all of those people that have got elected because of Rush telling these people to show up for the non-conservative, now they're passing these bills that have benefits for horse racing tracks and NASCAR and everything else. And then he says that the party should just disband. Crazy. Crazy. We're finally reaping what we've sowed with this. We finally have. And I will admit, at one time, I was the same way. You just got to grin and bear it. You got to vote for these people because the alternative is worse. Is worse. But I can draw a line in the sand where I start to expect to get something in return. I mean, we the people, us commoners out here, are supposed to be the leaders, technically the leaders in this country. We're not the ones who are supposed to compromise. The people who run for office are supposed to compromise for us. They're elected to represent us. And dare I say it, you'd have a hard time scrounging up a majority of Republicans in this country who would go along with a $1.1 trillion omnibus bill with all this pork to spread around. I just don't understand. But this passes for media leadership, and this passes for political leadership in the year 2015. So after all these years of building this monstrosity, now Rush says, oh, I guess we should just disband it now. I have a question. What did he think was going to happen? What did he think was going to happen? Because you know what eventually happens with something like this? See, this is something that maybe I don't know if I've ever talked about before. See, what happens is when you start telling conservatives that they need to show up and start voting for people who are not conservative, you're putting in their subconscious that it's okay. And what happens is the next time around, the next election, their tolerance for a non-conservative has been lowered. So you have a person who's 100% conservative would get a 100% on the Liberty score at conservativereview.com. And Rush says, well, you need to go and vote for that politician who only would get a 75% on the same scale. And the 100% conservative says, oh, okay. Okay. Then the next election, it's a 70% conservative. And having learned the first time, that 100% conservative says, oh, I guess I got to go vote for the 70% guy now. And then the next time after that, the 65% guy. And then the 60% guy. And never does the number go the opposite direction. Does it get closer to that conservative who is looking for a true conservative candidate? And suddenly you have conservatives voting for Mitt Romney, and somehow Rush Limbaugh says, I don't know how this happened. It's learned behavior over a course of many years. And see, that's why I've come out and said I'm not going to vote for certain people, because I woke up one day and said, oh yeah, that's what's going on. That has gotten into my head. Subconsciously, I'm lowering my standards by being fearful of the other side. Well, I'm not going to live in fear anymore of the other side. Being fearful of them does not help me. Wanting to beat them helps me. And I believe the only people that can do that are true conservatives. And maybe one of these days, we'll learn that. But when you start telling people that it's okay to vote for the moderate, they'll continue to vote for the moderate if no other alternative is given. It's not a one-time thing. But now, disband the GOP. This is no different than those conservatives in the House who wanted to overtake John Boehner and had no plan. It's just all unicorns and rainbows. It's just magically, somehow our country's going to get more conservative by putting more moderates in office. I don't know how that works, but that's what Rush has been pushing, and it's just not him. It's the others too. That's what he's been pushing for years and years and years, and I've resolved on this show to combat that. If they want to go that way, then I would tell conservatives, don't show up. And maybe it's maybe just like an alcoholic. At some point, you just get tired of being tired at some point. And that's why I've tried to tell you that in this country, if whatever that saying means, that a lot of we need to take our country back. It's such a cliche. You know, there's a reason I don't say that here. There's a reason I don't use the word patriot and all that. They're all horrible cliches. That's why I've told you that if you want to take, quote unquote, take the country back, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But you have to have the courage for it to get worse before it gets better. And that means not giving in to these moderates. and not following somebody who tells you should show up to vote whoever the Republican is. And then that person all these years later said, oh, I got to tear down the exact thing that I'm probably responsible for. It's crazy. But I got to go. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio, and I hope you all have a great weekend.